Dreams of the Rusty Bucket. Zorp's bucket hated hull scrubbing day. It wasn't just the gritty feeling of space dust clinging to his exoskeleton, or the constant threat of slipping off the bucket's magnetic boots and drifting into the inky black. It was the sheer, soul-crushing monotony of it all. Swish, scrub, swear under his breath when a particularly stubborn patch of cosmic grime refused to budge. Repeat, ad nauseam. He paused, leaning against the bucket's rusting flank, and deactivated his scrub brush. The stars blazed around him, a million pinpricks of defiance against the void. He imagined himself captaining a sleek, chrome vessel, charting courses to uncharted galaxies. He'd discover new life forms, broker peace treaties between warring species, maybe even find a decent space burger joint that didn't serve recycled algae patties. His daydream was interrupted by a sputtering cough from the bucket's ancient engine. The whole ship shuddered, the magnetic boots nearly lost their grip, and Zorp yelped, grabbing onto a corroded access panel. "Bucket, you old rust bucket, not again," he muttered, more exasperated than frightened. Malfunctions were as common as meteor showers on the rusty bucket. He reactivated his magnetic boots, double-checking their seal before resuming his scrubbing. The bucket was a relic, a testament to cheap spacefaring and questionable engineering. Its corridors were a maze of patched-up wiring and jury-rigged repairs. Its life support system wheezed like a geriatric Grobner. But it was home. Sort of. A particularly loud clang echoed from inside the ship. Zorp sighed. Probably just Krill, the ship's perpetually grumpy mechanic, wrestling with another broken pipe. He tried to recapture his earlier reverie, but the image of chrome spaceships had been replaced by the very real and very unglamorous image of the bucket's leaking fuel lines. "Adventure will find me," he told himself, scrubbing with renewed vigor. "I just need to be ready when it does." His stomach rumbled, a reminder that it was almost lunch. Lunch on the bucket meant nutrient paste, a flavorless sludge that allegedly contained all the essential vitamins and minerals a growing space urchin needed. Zorp suspected it also contained recycled boot polish. Suddenly, a high-pitched whine pierced the relative silence of space. It grew louder, rapidly approaching. Zorp squinted, shielding his eyes with a grime-covered hand. A small, automated cargo drone was hurtling towards the bucket, trailing a plume of black smoke. "Not again," Zorp groaned. Those drones were supposed to deliver replacement parts and rations, but they had a nasty habit of malfunctioning and crash-landing into the bucket's hull. He watched helplessly as the drone, its navigation system clearly on the fritz, slammed into the bucket with a resounding thud. The ship shuddered violently, throwing Zorp against the hull. His scrub brush went flying into the void, a tiny speck of green disappearing into the vastness of space. "Great," he muttered, picking himself up. "Now I have to explain to Krill why I lost the scrub brush. He'll probably make me clean the engine room with a toothbrush." He made his way back to the airlock, carefully navigating the now-dented hull. The drone lay embedded in the bucket's side, its cargo bay partially exposed. Zorp eyed it with curiosity. Sometimes, those malfunctioning drones carried interesting things. Once, he'd found a box of glow-in-the-dark space worms. They'd made excellent nightlights, until Krill confiscated them, claiming they were interfering with the bucket's navigation systems. He sealed himself in the airlock and cycled the pressure. As the inner door hissed open, he was greeted by the familiar smell of stale recycled air and Krill's pungent blend of lubricating oil and desperation. "Zorp! What in the blazes was that racket?" Krill emerged from the engine room, wiping grease from his multi-jointed hands. He was a Gruglian, a species known for their mechanical aptitude and their perpetually sour disposition. "Drone malfunction, Krill," Zorp replied, trying to sound nonchalant. "It, sort of kissed the bucket's hull." Krill grumbled, peering at Zorp with suspicion. "Kissed?" It sounded more like a full-blown make-out session. "You didn't have anything to do with this, did you, urchin?" "Me? Never!" Zorp protested, perhaps a little too vehemently. "I was just scrubbing the hull, like you told me to." Krill narrowed his eyes. "And where's the scrub brush?" Zorp winced. About that, later, after a grueling hour of scrubbing the engine room with a toothbrush, Krill hadn't been kidding. Zorp retreated to his cramped quarters. His quarters consisted of a tiny alcove near the ship's hydroponics bay, barely big enough for his cot, and a small storage locker. He collapsed onto his cot, exhausted and covered in grime. He reached under his pillow and pulled out his most prized possession, a tattered, dog-eared copy of Spacefarer Jax and the Quest for the Crystal Nebula. The cover was faded, the pages were brittle, and the spine was held together with duct tape, but to Zorp, it was a portal to another universe. He'd read it countless times, memorizing every thrilling chapter, every daring escape, every heroic deed. He opened the book, inhaling the musty scent of aged paper and adventure. He began to read, losing himself in Jax's daring exploits. As he read, a flicker of hope ignited within him. Maybe, just maybe, his own adventure was waiting just around the corner. Maybe he wouldn't be stuck scrubbing hulls and eating nutrient paste forever. Maybe, one day, he'd be the one charting courses to uncharted galaxies, facing down fearsome space pirates, and saving the universe from unimaginable threats. He closed the book, a determined glint in his eyes. He knew he had a lot to learn, a lot to prove. He was just a space urchin, living on a rusty old freighter. But even space urchins could dream. And Zorp Scuzzbucket had a very big dream indeed. A dream that extended far beyond the confines of the rusty bucket, out into the vast, unexplored reaches of the cosmos. He looked forward to the day his big dream became a big reality. Captain Krill's secret. The jarring blare of the ship's comm system yanked Zorp from a reverie. He'd been lost in a mental replay of the famed Xylo escape, ripped from the pages of his dog-eared novel, when Captain Krill's voice, like grinding gears, shattered the quiet, "All hands, mess hall. Pronto!" Zorp groaned, the sonic scraper clattering against the deck plates. Another pointless drill? Or worse, the dreaded Grobner inspection? He swiped a smudge of stardust from his brow, leaving a faint, iridescent trail. The corridor, a metal canyon smelling of overprocessed protein and stale ozone, beckoned. The mess hall buzzed with a heterogeneous mix of beings plucked from across the cosmos, grunts, engineers, navigators, all crammed together on mismatched seating. Krill, ramrod straight, his one good eye sharp, stood before them. Nearby, Inky Squibbles, the first mate, jittered like a plucked nerve, tentacles coiling and uncoiling. "All right, you lot." Krill's voice, a rasp of space dust and old engines, cut through the din. "I've gathered you to announce a special consignment." A ripple of unease spread through the room. A special cargo on the bucket usually spelled disaster. The last one had been those hyper-aggressive slugs with the insatiable appetites. "This op is top-tier classified," Krill continued, his tone dropping. "Need-to-know basis only. Which means, you'll know precious little." He cleared his throat, the sound like a rusty valve opening. "Discretion will be generously rewarded. Double hazard pay for this run." "Double hazard pay?" Zorp's ears pricked. Freedom from this tin can might finally be within reach, maybe even a down payment on his own ship. He leaned forward, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs, a chaotic blend of hope and dread. Inky edged closer, his tentacles a tangle of anxiety. "Captain," he hissed, barely audible above the ship's thrum. "Are you certain about this?" "The cargo's nature." Krill shot him a withering glare. "Inky," I said, "it's done. The credits are vital. And anyway," he added, softening slightly, "we've weathered far worse." "But Captain," Inky insisted, his voice tinged with panic. "This isn't some slug infestation. This could compromise the whole ship. The crew." "Enough, Inky!" Krill snapped, his gruffness returning with a vengeance. "Don't undermine me in front of the crew." He addressed the assembled spacefarers again. "Dismissed. Back to your posts." The crew scattered, a murmur of speculation trailing behind them. Zorp, however, lingered by the exit, his curiosity piqued. The hushed exchange between Krill and Inky had ignited something within him. What made this cargo so perilous? What secret was Krill concealing? He watched as Inky trailed Krill into the captain's cramped quarters, the door whispering shut behind them. He hesitated, then stole closer, pressing an ear to the cool metal. Muffled voices filtered through, Krill's rumbling growl and Inky's anxious squeaks. He strained to decipher the words. Biological agent, Inky's voice, laced with dread. Glagan tech, volatile, we have the containment unit, Krill countered, his voice firm. State of the art. Nothing gets through. But what if it breaches, Captain? Inky pleaded. What if the containment fails? We're talking about a potential pandemic. The Glagans were notorious for their zeal when it came to bioweaponry. We'll take precautions, Krill responded, a hint of impatience creeping into his tone. Extra shielding, biohazard protocols. We'll follow every regulation to the letter. Regulations drafted after the Glagan attacks, Captain. They barely scratched the surface of what they unleashed. Inky's voice cracked with fear. Zorp's heart thudded in his chest. A bioweapon? Glagan technology? This was exponentially more dangerous than he'd imagined. The Glagans, a long-vanished and merciless race, were infamous for their horrific biological experiments. Their technology was volatile, and its lethality was legend. He heard Krill sigh, a sound of weary resignation. Look, Inky, he said, his voice softening. I understand your reservations. But we're out of options. The credits are too tempting. And besides, a flash of defiance in his voice, I won't cower before some relic virus. We'll handle it. We always do. But Captain. Inky began, only to be cut short. That's final, Inky. Prep the cargo hold. And keep this quiet. Comprehend? A moment of silence, then Inky's defeated sigh. Understood, Captain. Zorp retreated from the door, his mind reeling. He couldn't believe what he'd just overheard. A Glagan bioweapon, aboard the rusty bucket. Madness. He had to act. He couldn't simply stand by, waiting for catastrophe to strike. But what could he do? He was a mere hull scrubber, a nobody. He had no rank, no influence. But he possessed one thing, a burning sense of adventure, and the growing conviction that adventure was about to find him, ready or not. He glanced at his grimy hands, the same hands that had spent countless hours scraping the ship's hull, now trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. He needed more information. He needed to unearth Krill's secret and find a way to stop this madness before it detonated. This was no longer just about the bucket, this was far bigger. Far deadlier. He turned and hurried back towards the engine room, a plan already forming in his mind. He might be a space urchin, but he was about to become something greater. He was about to become the unlikely savior the rusty bucket desperately needed. Into the Glagan sector. The rusty bucket groaned, its time-worn frame protesting against the ceaseless pelting of cosmic grit and rogue asteroids. Near a viewport, Zorp clung to a rail, a blend of fascination and dread churning within him as they navigated the asteroid field that serrated the Glagan sector's edge. Each immense, battered stone, a testament to eons of space collisions, stood as a silent ward against intrusion. Steady as she goes, Bolt. Captain Krill's voice, roughened by decades of yelling over engine roar, rasped from the command chair. This ain't a picnic. One slip and we're chum. Space chum, that is. Bolt, fingers dancing across the controls, merely grunted. Just trying to keep us space-worthy, Cap-N. These rocks ain't known for their gentleness. He expertly guided the freighter through a tight opening, shields flaring as ice scraped along the hull. Inky, her tendrils fidgeting around a datapad, twisted her appendages in concern. Are you certain about this route, Captain? I've heard tales. Tales of ships swallowed whole in this sector. Krill scoffed. Tales, Inky? You and your yarns. This is the quickest path, end of discussion. Besides, he murmured, though Zorp, with his acute hearing, still caught the words, the less time spent in Glagan territory, the better. A chill snaked down Zorp's back. The captain's apprehension was a tangible thing, amplifying his own concerns. The thought of the Glagan bioweapon, that unstable compound hidden somewhere in the hold, haunted him. He glanced back at the cargo bay, a weight of responsibility settling heavily. Emerging from the asteroid field felt like crossing a threshold into another reality. The frantic jumble of cosmic debris yielded to a disturbing void, a vast, lightless canvas pricked only by frigid, distant stars. But the serenity was a mirage. Shapes sharpened on the bucket's forward sensors, resolving with alarming speed. Glagan cruisers. Streamlined, predatory vessels with stark angles and pulsing crimson energy lines, they patrolled the sector with chilling authority. Zorp's gut clenched. Incoming transmission. Inky's voice shook. Glagan patrol craft, designation, Nashfang 7. Krill stiffened, his gruffness sharpening into something steely. Put them through, Inky. And sound, professional for once. A gravelly voice, laced with static, invaded the bridge. Unidentified vessel. You are trespassing in designated Glagan space. State your purpose and cargo manifest. Krill cleared his throat, regaining his composure. This is Captain Barnaby Krill of the freighter Rusty Bucket. We are transporting, agricultural produce to the Kepler's 186F colony. Manifest is attached. He hit a button, transmitting the forged document. A tense silence followed, underscored by the engine's steady thrum. Zorp's breath caught in his throat, eyes flicking between the captain, Inky, and the viewport, where the Nashfang 7 swelled in size, its weapon emplacements clearly visible. Your manifest is satisfactory, the Glagan voice finally conceded, tinged with suspicion. Prepare for inspection. We will be boarding presently. Inspection. Inky whimpered. But our hold is a mess. Just follow procedure, Inky, Krill snapped, eyes narrowed. Bolt, secure the docking clamps. Zorp, get below and, ensure everything is in order. And for the love of space, don't draw attention to yourself. Zorp nodded, heart hammering. This was it. The critical moment. He had to find a way to disable the Glagan bioweapon before it was too late, but how could he possibly manage that with Glagan soldiers swarming the ship? He descended to the cargo hold, his mind racing in overdrive. The hold was a dimly lit expanse filled with crates and containers of every description, held together by a chaotic web of straps and chains. He glanced around, attempting to appear occupied as he adjusted a stack of boxes. He identified the container he needed to find, the one Krill and Inky had been covertly discussing. It was tucked amongst several boxes labeled nutrient paste. It was larger than the others and conspicuously unmarked, like any identifying features had been purposely removed. Approaching the container, he heard the metallic shriek of docking clamps locking into place. The Glagans were aboard. He slipped behind a stack of crates, peering through the gaps. 2 Glagan soldiers marched into the hold, encased in matte black armor and brandishing energy rifles. Their faces were concealed behind opaque visors, their movements precise and menacing. This is the cargo hold, one of the Glagans grated, their voice warped by their helmets. It is disorganized. Standard operating procedure, the other Glagan responded. Commence scan. Prioritize anomalies and unauthorized modifications. Panic surged through Zorp. If they scanned the container, they would uncover the bioweapon instantly. He had to act, to create a distraction. He saw a cargo net hanging loosely from a nearby support strut. A desperate idea took root. Taking a steadying breath, he seized the end of the net and gave it a sharp yank. The net tore free, collapsing onto the 2 Glagan soldiers in a suffocating shroud of rope and mesh. The soldiers bellowed in surprise and fury, struggling against the tangled net. Zorp acted instantly, scrambling towards the unmarked container. This was his only shot. The scan. The Glagan comms screeched, a grating assault that banished the faint, stale scent of space cabbage from the Rusty Bucket's bridge. Captain Krill, bent low over the navigation console, unleashed a string of spiced void curses fit to singe a pirate's beard. "Get him on screen," he snapped, snapping his spine straighter. The view screen swam into focus, revealing the glowering mug of a Glagan commander, his chitinous features twisted in perpetual displeasure, multifaceted eyes like chips of obsidian. "Commander Vlarg," the legend rippled beneath him, translated in choppy galactic standard. "Unidentified vessel," Vlarg's amplified voice resonated, a threat woven into every syllable. "You are trespassing in Glagan space. Identify yourselves and state your business." Krill puffed himself up, a counterfeit show of confidence that tasted like ash in his mouth. "This is the Rusty Bucket, a humble freighter engaged in legitimate commerce. We're transporting hydroponics to the Kepler 186F colony." He cringed internally. Kepler 186F housed a well-known Glagan research facility. Inspiration had clearly deserted him. Vlarg's gaze sharpened, each facet reflecting the dim bridge light like a shard of ice, sending a shiver down Krill's spine. "Your transponder broadcasts a weak, erratic signal. Your plotted course veers wildly from established trade routes. We require a complete cargo manifest and scan." "A scan?" Krill stammered, attempting outrage. "That's a gross violation. We possess all necessary permits, clearances. The bureaucratic labyrinth alone would consume a solar cycle." He desperately needed to stall for Zorp, giving the hapless engineer a few more precious moments to grapple with the bioweapon. Vlarg remained impassive. "Anomalies necessitate thorough investigation. Prepare your vessel for scanning. Compliance is mandatory." The final words echoed with a chilling decree that brooked no argument. Krill conceded defeat. Prolonged resistance would only deepen suspicions, and he had a growing premonition that Vlarg already knew. "Very well, Commander," he conceded, his voice tight. "We will comply, though I must lodge a formal protest against this unwarranted intrusion." Vlarg severed the connection without another word. The screen dissolved into the indifferent tapestry of stars. Krill sagged against his chair, his breath hissing from his lungs. "Space dust and damnation," he muttered, raking a hand through his thinning hair. He checked the chronometer. Zorp had been toiling in the hold for what felt like eons. A klaxon shrieked, announcing the start of the scan. The rusty bucket vibrated as a powerful energy beam engulfed the ship, bathing the interior in an unsettling, vibrant emerald luminescence. Every conduit on the bridge pulsed with strained power. Meanwhile, in the cargo hold, Zorp was a quivering, perspiring wreck. The bioweapon, an obscene, pulsating sphere trapped within a reinforced containment cell, taunted him with its silent menace. He'd managed to jimmy open an access panel, revealing a chaotic nest of wires and circuits as intelligible as ancient Glagan scripture. The scanning beam intensified, its energy lancing through the hull and searing its way through the ship's innards. Zorp felt the vibrations throbbing through the deck plating, a deep, resonant drumming that vibrated in his very marrow. The air crackled with static, causing the sparse fur on his arms to bristle. He grappled with a collection of scavenged tools, his fingers slick with sweat. He was operating on pure instinct, blindly clipping wires and praying for deliverance. He had bypassed a handful of security interlocks, rerouted power conduits, anything that might disrupt the signal, all predicated on his meager understanding of Glagan technology. He was banking on luck and a hefty dose of desperation. The scam persisted, implacable and invasive. Zorp could almost sense its probing tendrils reaching into the deepest corners of the vessel, hunting for something. He imagined the beam pausing, focusing, locking onto the bioweapon. Abruptly, a cacophony of alarms erupted throughout the ship. Red emergency lights strobed, painting the cargo hold in a hellish crimson wash. The deck pitched violently, slamming Zorp against the containment unit. He clawed his way back to his feet, his heart hammering against his ribs. Had the scan pinpointed the weapon? Had he triggered a fail-safe mechanism? On the bridge, Captain Krill wrestled with the controls, his features a mask of grim resolve. "What in the seven hells is happening?" he bellowed, struggling to override the ship's automated systems. The scanning beam stuttered, its intensity fluctuating erratically. On the view screen, Commander Vlag's image reappeared, his chitinous face a grotesque caricature of fury. "What have you done?" Vlag screeched, his voice warped beyond recognition. "What have you unleashed upon us?" Before Krill could reply, the rusty bucket bucked violently, flinging him from his command chair. The light sputtered and died, plunging the bridge into impenetrable blackness. Outside, through the viewport, Krill glimpsed the Glagan cruiser, its hull radiating an unsettling energy, beginning to drift aimlessly, its weapon systems winding down. The scan had been aborted, but something far more calamitous had been set in motion. Hidden in the hold. The Glagan scanner's thrum escalated to a bone-deep shudder that resonated through the rusty bucket's ancient hull. Zorp, his heart a frantic drum against his carapace, darted through a cramped service duct. He'd bolted from his impeller station the instant Krill's clipped order to prepare for inspection crackled over the comms. The captain's jumpiness, coupled with the odd precautions, spelled trouble in bold letters. And Zorp's boundless curiosity, the very itch that had driven him to stow away on this derelict, demanded answers. Years of scouring the ship's grimy underbelly allowed him to navigate the vessel's innards with effortless grace. The ragtag crew rarely trespassed in these forgotten veins of the ship, leaving him a phantom, a rustling shade amongst the pipes and conduits. As he neared the cargo hold, the air grew stagnant, heavy as a shroud. This overlooked corner of the ship usually housed Krill's, shall we say, acquisitions. Zorp had envisioned it overflowing with plunder, scintillating gems wrested from the Cygnus Reach, relics of lost civilizations, maybe even a functional blaster or two. He tightened his grip on a dented wrench, his paltry safeguard against discovery. He'd play the maintenance card, though the wrench hadn't seen duty in cycles. Reaching the cargo hold's access panel, a reinforced bulkhead secured by a petrified locking system, he pressed his ear to the frigid metal. The scanner's pulse was deafening here, a tangible presence that made his antennae quiver. Krill and Vlag's fragmented voices bled through the intercom, their words dissolving into static. Time was of the essence. He wrestled with the manual override. Rust cascaded from the wheel like granular dust. It resisted, wailing a mechanical lament. Finally, with a tortured screech, it yielded. He heaved against the weighty door, cracking it open just enough to squeeze through. Near-total darkness enveloped the cargo hold. A few failing emergency lamps cast elongated, spectral shadows that danced mockingly. The air hung still and thick, imbued with an alien sterility that clashed starkly with the bucket's usual oily reek. His own breathing echoed in the stifling void. Activating his wrist console's low-intensity lamp, he painted a narrow swathe of illumination into the gloom. The beam skipped across stacked crates, their surfaces featureless, disturbingly uniform. No jewels, no relics, no blasters. Only crates. He ventured further, the light a tentative blade slicing through the darkness. The crates, arranged in precise rows, consumed the space from floor to ceiling. Fashioned from a cold, unfamiliar grey metal, they were smooth and unyielding to the touch. Intricate locking mechanisms, far beyond any standard container, sealed each crate. A low-frequency drone issued from the crates, a subtle vibration that gnawed at his very core. It differed from the scanner's drone, a deeper, resonant throb that sent shivers down his exoskeleton. He reached out, his claw hovering above a locking mechanism. He hesitated. Something felt fundamentally wrong. This wasn't simply cargo, it was something far more profound. He targeted a nearby crate with his console, seeking information. The screen stuttered, displaying a jumble of glyphs before going blank. The console emitted a frantic series of beeps, displaying an error message he'd never encountered. "Well, that's peculiar," he muttered. He tried another crate, with identical results. The crates were disrupting his console, blocking any attempt at analysis. Compelled by a growing sense of dread, he pressed onward, deeper into the hold. The drone intensified, the air thickened, the shadows grew more ominous. He navigated rows upon rows of identical crates, each a silent, metallic sentinel. Then he saw it. At the far end of the hold, awash in the wan glow of a flickering lamp, sat a single crate unlike the others. It was larger, certainly, and its surface writhed with a network of glowing, pulsing veins. A sickly green light emanated from these veins, bathing the surrounding crates in an unearthly luminescence. The drone emanating from this crate was overwhelming, a throbbing pulse that reverberated through his very essence. The air shimmered with heat, and his skin prickled with a faint tingling. He moved closer, drawn as if by some morbid fascination. As he approached, he noticed small, circular windows set into the crate's side. He peered cautiously through one, his breath seizing in his throat. Inside, suspended in a viscous, viridescent fluid, was something. It was difficult to discern in the dimness, but it appeared organic, a grotesque mass of pulsating flesh and writhing tentacles. Its surface glistened with a strange, oily sheen as it pulsed rhythmically. He recoiled in utter horror, stumbling backward. The image branded itself onto his mind, a nightmare vision he knew he would never shed. Comprehension dawned. This wasn't treasure. This wasn't cargo. This was something far more malevolent. This was something alive. And judging by appearances, far from benign. The bunny menace. The grotesque creature marinating in green goo had been unpleasant, but as Zorp ventured deeper, a subtle, percussive pulse tickled his sensitive antennae. He cautiously circled a stack of crates adorned with incomprehensible Glagan symbols and froze. Rabbits! Space rabbits! Hundreds upon hundreds. Their plush, snow-white coats seemed to radiate a soft glow in the gloom. Tiny noses twitched, and enormous, rose-petal eyes blinked with disarming innocence. Some were munching on what resembled astral alfalfa scattered across the deck, while others frolicked, their delicate paws almost silent on the metal. Zorp, a veteran of scouring grime from starship hulls, felt an unfamiliar warmth bloom within his calloused heart. Never had he encountered such preciousness. He extended a hesitant claw, and one rabbit, braver than its kin, hopped directly onto his palm. Its fur felt like spun moonlight. Well now, little guy, Zorp rumbled, scratching behind a velvety ear. The rabbit chirped a tiny, pleased sound. Maybe this ain't so bad after all. Just a ship full of... His thought fractured. The number. They'd multiplied. He'd estimated 100 initially, but the hold now crawled with them. A living carpet of white fluff stretched deep into the shadows. And they were feeding. Not exclusively on the space hay. They were gnawing at the crates themselves. Zorp watched, transfixed with dawning horror, as a dozen rabbits assaulted one of the containers, their minuscule teeth working with unnerving speed. Metal dust sprayed as they devoured a corner, their pink eyes alight with almost feverish hunger. In moments, a significant chunk vanished. Then, one rabbit, barely larger than his fist, locked onto a power conduit snaking across the floor. One nip, and sparks erupted. Undeterred, the creature chewed onward. Hey! Knock it off! Zorp bellowed, dropping the rabbit. It landed softly and instantly joined the metallic feast on the cable. He tried to wave them away, but they were relentless, scaling his claws, nibbling his boots, ignoring his frantic gestures. And as he flailed, the impossible occurred, more rabbits. An endless stream. The untouched pile of space hay now swarmed with a writhing, squirming mass. And then, impossibly, the pile doubled in size. Then doubled again. Panic seized Zorp's chest. This wasn't charming. This was nightmarish. He stumbled backward, colliding with a crate. He spotted a small data jack. An idea sparked. Perhaps there was information about these fuzzy fiends. His nimble claws struggled with the port, finally connecting to his wrist-mounted data reader. Glagan text cascaded across the screen. He couldn't decipher the language, but recognized the universal symbol for a data log. He initiated the download. The log was heavily encrypted, but Zorp, seasoned by salvaging derelicts, knew a few tricks. After a flurry of coding, the encryption shattered, and the Glagan text morphed into his native scuzzbucket tongue. The log opened with a chilling title, Project Lagomorph Annihilation. Zorp's antennae sagged. Annihilation? The log chronicled the Glagan's desperate bid to engineer the ultimate weapon, a biological entity capable of devouring anything, replicating exponentially, and overwhelming any foe. The space rabbits were the result. Initial trials proved promising, the log stated. The lagomorphs displayed an insatiable appetite, consuming various metals, synthetics, and organic matter. Replication rates defied prediction. However, Zorp's claw tightened. However, the lagomorphs proved too indiscriminate. They consumed all. Control measures failed. Containment was breached. The project was deemed a catastrophic failure and slated for termination. But, again, that ominous but. Certain elements within the Glagan High Command saw merit in weaponizing the lagomorphs, despite the risks. They presumed they could be confined and deployed selectively. They erred. The log detailed a succession of botched control attempts, each culminating in disaster. Planets stripped bare, starships devoured, entire Glagan legions consumed. The rabbits were unstoppable. The final entry was starkly brief, containment imminent. Evacuation authorized. May the void grant succor to our souls. Zorp lifted his gaze from the data reader. The cargo hold had transformed into a swirling blizzard of white fur. The rabbits were ubiquitous, gnawing at everything. The crates, the cables, even the ship's bulkheads. The percussive thumping had swelled into a deafening cacophony. He now understood. These weren't merely adorable rabbits. They were a plague. A fluffy, cuddly, metal-munching plague. And he, Zorp Scuzzbucket, had unleashed them upon the rusty bucket and, quite possibly, the entire Glagan fleet. His earlier apprehension dissolved, supplanted by icy, unvarnished dread. He had to act. He had to halt them. But how could one insignificant space urchin possibly quell an army of infinitely duplicating, omnivorous rabbits? A fluffy weapon. Zorp's gaze snagged on the Glagan datapad, the shimmering script blurring through the prick of unshed tears. Lagomorph annihilation. Propagation rate. Unchecked expansion. Each phrase struck him like a physical blow, shattering his naive notions. These weren't merely adorable space bunnies, they were armaments. Living, breathing, fuzz-encased engines of planetary collapse. He scrolled on, his gut twisting with each line of alien jargon. The Glagans hadn't simply bred these creatures for rapid multiplication, they'd weaponized their inherent charm. The datapad chronicled behavioral modifications crafted to evoke irresistible fondness and an instinct to defend, effectively neutralizing opposition. A simulation flared to life. A verdant world, bursting with life, dominated the screen. Then, tiny, pink-nosed bunnies materialized, their fluffy cottontails twitching as they gamboled through the exotic flora. At first, the inhabitants, vaguely reptilian humanoids boasting surprisingly soulful eyes, were enchanted. They gurgled with delight, offered treats, and cradled the bunnies in their scaled arms. Soon, the numbers swelled. The bunnies bred like wildfire, devouring vegetation at an alarming pace. Lush fields devolved into desolate wastelands. The reptilian humanoids, initially charmed, grew uneasy. Their cooing morphed into anxious whispers. Attempts to contain the bunnies proved futile. The sheer, overwhelming tide of fluff defeated them. The simulation accelerated. The bunnies consumed everything. Forests evaporated. Cities vanished beneath a billowing blanket of pink and white fur. The reptilian humanoids, their faces masks of utter desolation, clung to rooftops, marooned in a boundless ocean of bouncing, ravenous lagomorphs. Finally, the screen died, leaving Zorp in stunned paralysis. He recoiled, his spiky carapace grating against the frigid metal of the corridor wall. The rusty bucket, his haven, his refuge, was now a mobile plague carrier. He, Zorp Scuzzbucket, quintessential hull scrubber, had unknowingly unleashed a calamity upon the galaxy. His initial delight in the bunnies now felt like a profound betrayal, a personal failing. So eager for a thrill, so blinded by the lure of adventure, he'd failed to foresee the fallout. He'd been an utter fool. He squeezed his eyes shut, attempting to erase the images from the simulation, the incessant thumping resonating from the cargo hold. He had to act. But how? He was just Zorp. An insignificant speck. A particle of space dust adrift in the cosmic void. What could he possibly do to thwart a bioweapon contrived by one of the galaxy's most formidable empires? Doubt clawed at him, whispering treacherous temptations. Perhaps he should just remain concealed, feign ignorance. Let the Glargans deliver their payload, let some innocent world succumb to the fluffy menace. It wasn't his doing, after all. He was just a lowly hull scrubber. But the image of the reptilian humanoids, their faces etched with hopeless despair, seared itself onto his mind. He imagined their children, their families, their entire civilization consumed by an inexorable wave of cuteness and chaos. He couldn't permit it. He wouldn't. He opened his eyes, his gaze now sharp with determination. He might be just Zorp, an unknown quantity from nowhere, but he wasn't powerless. He knew the rusty bucket intimately. He knew its hidden alcoves, its concealed compartments, its neglected maintenance tunnels. He might not be able to conquer the Glargan Empire, but he could cripple their weapon. He could stall for time, perhaps even discover a means of containing the bunnies before they reached their destination. Yet, how? He needed a plan, a strategy. He couldn't simply charge in blindly. He required information. He needed to decipher the bunnies' weaknesses, their vulnerabilities. He needed to discover a means of turning their very appeal against them. He glanced back at the datapad, his mind churning. The simulation had depicted the bunnies devouring flora. Could he starve them? Deprive them of sustenance? But what did they consume? The datapad remained silent on the matter. He meticulously scrutinized the technical specifications again, seeking any clue, any indication. Then, his eye snagged on a single phrase, replication catalyst. His heart jolted. The Glargans weren't merely relying on natural procreation. They were employing a catalyst to accelerate the process, to ensure unchecked expansion. If he could disable the catalyst. But how? The datapad offered no specifics regarding the catalyst's composition or its delivery mechanism. It was classified data, restricted to the Glargan elite. Zorp slumped against the wall, his nascent hope evaporating. He was back to square one. He knew what needed doing, but possessed no idea how to accomplish it. Then, an idea sparked. The Glargan officer, so keen to inspect the cargo bay, had mentioned something about environmental regulation. He'd seemed particularly fixated on maintaining optimal temperature and moisture levels. Could those environmental controls be connected to the replication catalyst? Could the catalyst be vulnerable to shifts in temperature or humidity? It was a distant hope, but the only lead he had. He straightened, his resolve renewed. He didn't know precisely what course of action to take, but he knew he had to try. He had to find a strategy to sabotage the environmental controls, to jam a wrench into the Glargan scheming. He drew a deep breath and began to run, his spiky feet drumming on the metal deck. He had a vessel to compromise, a weapon to neutralize, and a galaxy to rescue. And he, Zorp Scuzzbucket, was just the space urchin to pull it off. Warning unheeded. Zorp darted through the cramped passageways, his delicate claws tap-dancing on the steel plating. A frosty dread, like 1,000 tiny needles, pricked at him beneath his shell. Reaching Captain Krill was paramount. The fate of, well, everything hung in the balance. He burst onto the bridge, a miniature tornado of grime and desperation. Krill, however, remained unreceptive, a rigid sentinel. All 6 eyes were riveted to the viewport, where a Glargan dreadnought bulked, its armored hull reflecting the twin suns in a menacing glare. "Stand fast, Scuzzbucket!" Krill barked, not bothering to turn. "Can't you see we're about to be scrutinized? This inspection eclipses all others. One iota of imperfection and we'll be scraping Glargan refuse chutes for a cycle." Zorp, gasping, blurted, "Captain, the bunnies. They aren't what we think. They're miniature planet-eaters. Bioweapons." Krill deigned to glance at him, his face a mask of irritation and disbelief. Planet eaters? Scuzzbucket, have you been sampling the fermented kelp again? Those are fluffer bunnies, utterly harmless, and worth a king's ransom to the Glargan upper crust. Now, unless you fancy explaining to a Glargan centurion why you're obstructing my inspection, I suggest you resume your hull scrubbing. But Captain! Zorp implored, his tone escalating. I witnessed it. They're proliferating. Devouring the packing material. And they're growing. Incredibly fast. He gesticulated wildly with his tiny appendages. And the growth inhibitors? Vanished. Krill exhaled heavily, a sound akin to a punctured pressure tank. Scuzzbucket, I admire your zeal. But I have a command to maintain, and a reputation to uphold. The Glargan inspectors are notoriously fastidious. They'll run diagnostics on the ship. They'll analyze the bunnies. If any danger existed, they'd uncover it. Now, kindly excuse me. He returned his attention to the viewport, adjusting his tunic. And try to present yourself decently, for a change. A wave of acute frustration nearly swept Zorp off his feet. He could see the Glargan boarding party emerge from the warship, their armored figures gliding toward the freighter. They anticipated fluffy pets. They were about to blunder into a biological cataclysm. Renewed resolve surged through Zorp, eclipsing both his apprehension and his irritation. If Krill refused to heed him, he would have to take action. He couldn't allow the Glargan to unleash those things upon the galaxy. Fine, Zorp conceded, his voice even and controlled. You're correct, Captain. My apologies. I'll return to my chores. Krill nodded, appeased. Excellent. Try to avoid trouble, Scuzzbucket. As Zorp pivoted, he deftly snatched a diminutive wrench from his belt, concealing it within his grasp. Reasoning with Krill was futile with the looming inspection. However, he possessed intimate knowledge of the vessel. He understood the environmental regulators. He knew how to inflict discomfort upon the bunnies. He slipped from the bridge into the labyrinthine corridors, his mind already crafting a strategy. He couldn't prevent the Glargan from boarding. But he could ensure those bunnies never departed this ship alive. He would compromise the environmental controls, suffocate them, freeze them, anything to halt their rampant multiplication and prevent their escape. The initial step involved the ventilation system. He recalled a seldom-used access point near the galley. It was meager, but a starting point. As he scurried toward his goal, he heard the resounding thud of Glargan boots striking the boarding ramp. The assessment had commenced. He had to act swiftly. He reached the access panel, a corroded square concealed behind a pile of discarded nutrient rations. With the wrench, he pried it open, revealing a chaotic array of wires and conduits. The atmosphere vibrated with the low drone of the ventilation system. He inhaled deeply, steadying his resolve. He wasn't a combatant, or a scientist, or even particularly courageous. He was simply Zorp Scuzzbucket, a humble hull scrubber. But he alone possessed the truth, the sole individual capable of stopping the bunnies. He began severing wires. Initially at random, fueled by adrenaline, then with increasing precision, targeting the conduits governing temperature and oxygen supply to the cargo hold. Electrical arcs flared, illuminating his determined countenance. The hum of the ventilation system began to falter and sputter. Abruptly, a gravelly voice startled him. What do you imagine you're doing, Scuzzbucket? Zorp froze, wrench suspended in mid-air, and turned slowly. Looming in the corridor was Glar, the ship's immense, four-armed mechanic. His expression conveyed no warmth. Just, standard servicing, Glar, Zorp stammered, striving for nonchalance. Captain's orders. Glar narrowed two of his four eyes, his gaze penetrating. Standard servicing on the ventilation system during a Glargan inspection? I think not. What are you truly planning, Scuzzbucket? Inspection day chaos. The Glargan commander, Vlarg, stared at the shimmering holographic readout. The scan of the rusty bucket's hold was perplexing. Too clean. Too normal. A cargo freighter hauling fertilizer should register a chaotic mess of nitrates, phosphates, and the faint hum of agitated beetle larvae. This displayed the sterile perfection of an operating theater. "Explain this, Captain," Vlag's voice dripped with suspicion. He was a towering figure even for a Glagan, his carapace a menacing obsidian sheen under the flickering lights of the rusty bucket's bridge. His multifaceted eyes, usually glinting with predatory calculation, were narrowed, focusing on Captain Krill with unnerving intensity. Krill, sweating profusely under Vlag's gaze, stammered, "Commander, the new shipment is exceptionally refined. A higher grade than usual." He dabbed at his brow with a greasy rag. "And we just finished a thorough cleaning cycle." Vlag grunted, a sound like tectonic plates grinding against each other. "A cleaning cycle? On a fertilizer freighter? Preposterous. I detect deception." He tapped a claw against the console, the sound echoing in the tense silence. "The scan is inconsistent. Orderly cargo is often a sign of something hidden. Something deliberately masked." Zorp, huddled behind a stack of empty nutrient paste dispensers near the doorway, felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. He knew exactly what was being masked. And he knew that if Vlag discovered the truth, the consequences would be catastrophic. Not just for the rusty bucket, but for every planet the Glagan Empire planned to conquer. "I assure you, Commander," Krill persisted, his voice wavering, "there is nothing to hide. We are merely efficient." Vlag's eyes narrowed further, the obsidian seeming to absorb all the light around them. "Efficient? An admirable quality. One I intend to verify personally." He turned to one of his guards, a hulking Glagan with a weapon that looked capable of vaporizing a small moon strapped to its back. "Prepare a boarding party. I want a full physical inspection of the cargo hold. Every crate, every container, every..." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the bridge. Nook and cranny. Zorp's mind raced. A physical inspection. That was it. Game over. There was no way to hide the exponentially multiplying fluff bombs. The Glagan inspectors would open a single crate, see the deceptively adorable creatures, and within seconds, the galaxy would be doomed. He had to do something. Anything. As the Glagan guards lumbered towards the docking clamps, preparing to board, Zorp knew he had only moments. He couldn't confront them directly, he'd be swatted aside like a bothersome spacefly. He needed a distraction. A big one. Something that would divert their attention, sow chaos, and buy him time. His eyes fell on the access panel to the ship's ventilation system, tucked away behind a stack of discarded space rations. An idea, reckless and desperate, sparked in his mind. It was insane, bordering on suicidal, but it was the only chance he had. He scurried towards the panel, his heart hammering against his ribs. With trembling fingers, he pried it open, revealing a network of grimy ducts and humming machinery. The air rushing through the vents carried the stale scent of recycled oxygen and despair. He reached into his pocket, retrieving the small, fur-covered monstrosities he had managed to capture earlier. They wriggled in his grasp, their pink eyes gleaming with unsettling innocence. He hated doing this, but he had no choice. He had to weaponize their cuteness, turn their insatiable hunger into a tool of, well, temporary inconvenience. He took a deep breath and tossed the bunnies into the ventilation shaft. 3 of them. That was all he dared. Any more and the entire system might collapse under their combined fluffiness. For the galaxy, he muttered, slamming the access panel shut. Almost immediately, a chorus of squeaks and thumps echoed from within the vents. The sounds, amplified by the metal ducts, spread rapidly throughout the ship, reaching the bridge in a cacophony of unsettling cuteness. Vlag paused, his head cocked to one side. What is that infernal racket?" Krill, his face pale, stammered, I don't know, Commander. We must have space rats?" "Yes, space rats. They sometimes get into the ventilation system." Vlag glared at him. Space rats that sound like miniature lawnmowers crossed with baby birds? I think not, Captain. The boarding ramp hissed as it connected to the rusty bucket. The Glagan guards, weapons at the ready, began to file onto the ship, their heavy footsteps reverberating through the corridors. The squeaking and thumping in the vents grew louder, more frantic. The sound of tiny claws scrabbling against metal was now punctuated by the unmistakable sound of chewing. "Commander," one of the guards shouted from the corridor. "The air vents. They're being eaten." Vlarg's eyes widened slightly. He turned back to Krill, his voice dangerously low. "Explain yourself, Captain. Now." Before Krill could utter another lie, a section of the ventilation duct above them buckled and burst open, showering the bridge with dust, grime, and 3 very angry fluffer-bunnies. The bunnies, disoriented and covered in debris, blinked their pink eyes and immediately began to gnaw on anything they could reach, cables, consoles, even the soles of Vlarg's boots. Chaos erupted. The Glagan guards, trained for intergalactic warfare, were utterly unprepared for an attack by hyper-aggressive, genetically modified space rabbits. They swatted at them with their weapons, but the bunnies were too small, too fast, and far too motivated by their insatiable hunger. Zorp watched from his hiding place, a grim satisfaction warring with a surge of guilt. His plan was working. The inspection was definitely being delayed. But the chaos he had unleashed was far greater than he had anticipated. One of the bunnies leaped onto Vlarg's head, burying itself in his thick carapace. Vlarg roared in frustration, trying to dislodge the creature, but it clung on with surprising strength, its tiny teeth making quick work of his ceremonial headgear. "Get them off me!" Vlarg bellowed, swatting wildly at the bunny. "Exterminate them! Exterminate them all!" The guards, momentarily forgetting their training, began firing their weapons indiscriminately, blasting holes in the bridge and narrowly missing each other. The air filled with the acrid smell of burnt metal and singed fur. Amidst the pandemonium, Zorp saw his opportunity. He slipped away from his hiding place and darted towards the ship's engineering section, his mind already formulating the next step in his desperate plan. The distraction had bought him time, but it was only a temporary reprieve. He still had to find a way to completely neutralize the fluffer bunnies before they devoured the entire ship, and then the galaxy. He just hoped he could do it before the Glagans regained control and turned their attention back to the truth hidden in the hold. The fate of everything rested on the shoulders of a lowly hull scrubber with a knack for getting into trouble. And a few very hungry space rabbits. Bunny breakdown. The first inspector, a bulky Glagan named Grunt 7, his mandibles clicking a nervous tattoo, cautiously squeezed into the ventilation shaft. His partner, the smaller and even more timid Grunt 4, lingered behind, a sputtering glow orb casting long, dancing shadows down the tunnel. The air was thick with metallic tang and a disturbingly sweet, floral undertone. "Proceed with extreme caution, Grunt 7, Vlarg's voice rasped over the comms. "Krill is beyond untrustworthy." Grunt 7's mandibles ratcheted up the tempo. He advanced, his armored boots echoing against the metal. Suddenly, a flicker in his beam. A twitching muzzle. Rosy nose. Scarlet pinpricks of light. "Report, Grunt 7. Vlarg snapped. The Glagan froze. A squeak, high and clear, pierced the silence of the shaft. One rabbit. Then 2. A dozen poured from the gloom, noses aquiver, whiskers twitching. Unbearably cute. Lethally adorable. Rabbits. Grunt 7 choked into the comm. "Sir, there appear to be rabbits in the ventilation system." Before Vlarg could retort, they pounced. Not with fangs or claws, but an irresistible avalanche of fluff and charm. They scaled his armor, nibbling exposed skin. A yelp, quickly swallowed by a strangled gurgle, was his only response as the furry onslaught increased. "Grunt 7. Status." Vlarg's voice now carried a sharp edge of panic. Grunt 4, paralyzed by terror, stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet. He clawed for his blaster, but his hands, vibrating like a hummingbird's wings, refused to cooperate. A single bunny launched itself at his face, tiny paws scrabbling at his eyes. He shrieked, the weapon clattering to the floor. Back in the cargo hold, Zorp monitored the burgeoning pandemonium via the ship's sensors. The ventilation system had become a churning vortex of pink and white. He watched the Glagan inspectors flail, their movements spastic and uncoordinated. A grim satisfaction bloomed within him. He swiftly rerouted the bunnycam to Vlag's location on the command ship. The commander paced, his face a thundercloud. Quarantine the situation. Vlag bellowed at his crew. Those lagomorphs are bioengineered weapons. Seal all sections. Implement quarantine protocols. On the rusty bucket, the bunnies were already hard at work. Not content with mere Glagan subjugation, they explored, investigated, and, most importantly, chewed. A small contingent discovered a Gordian knot of wires behind a galley control panel. Noses twitched in unison, and they commenced their work. Sparks showered. Light stuttered and died. The oven, inexplicably set to inferno, detonated with a sharp bang and a plume of acrid smoke. What in the blazes? Krill's voice echoed in the suddenly inky galley. Meanwhile, aboard the Glagan command ship, Bedlam reigned supreme. The bunnies, having overwhelmed initial containment efforts, now savaged critical systems. They devoured power conduits, plunging consoles into darkness. They sabotaged life support, imbuing the bridge with the cloying perfume of singed fur. Report! Vlag roared, his voice cracking. Sir, we've lost primary power to sectors 4 through 7, a Glagan officer squealed, his voice bordering on hysteria. Navigation's offline. And the communication array is broadcasting. Bunny noises? Indeed, the ship's comms now resonated with a chorus of squeaks, thumps, and the unsettling rasp of tiny teeth grinding on metal. Inky squibbles, huddled in a darkened corner of the rusty bucket's bridge, whimpered pathetically. We're doomed, I say. Sentenced by bunnies. He clutched his tentacles. The Glagan command ship shuddered violently. Klaxons wailed. Red strobes pulsed. The ship was crippled. Emergency power! Vlag shrieked. Activate backup generators. Someone get those creatures off my ship. The Glagan crew scurried, their movements clumsy with panic. Trained for space combat, interstellar diplomacy, hardened criminals, they were utterly unprepared for a wave of rapidly multiplying rabbits. Back in the ventilation system, the bunny population underwent exponential growth. Starting from a mere dozen, they were now in the hundreds, then thousands. Filling every crevice, gnawing on everything imaginable. The rusty bucket was morphing into a sprawling, warren-like labyrinth. Zorp observed the unfolding chaos, a disquieting mix of apprehension and grim satisfaction warring within him. His gambit had bought him time, diverting the Glagan onslaught. But the fluffy menace could not be allowed to proliferate unchecked. He had to concoct a means of neutralizing the furry peril. And he needed to do it fast. Rebellion in hyperspace. Zorp scrambled through the flickering corridors of the rusty bucket, the ship vibrating with the frenetic energy of utter pandemonium. The fluffy menace had spread like glitter-bomb shrapnel. Glagan soldiers, usually paragons of rigid discipline, were now tripping over each other, swatting at the air, their faces contorted in a mixture of fear and, was that actual cooing? Inky! Where are you? Zorp yelled, dodging a Glagan who was inexplicably trying to braid a bunny's ears. A whimper answered him from around a corner. He found Inky huddled behind a stack of dented cargo crates, tentacles quivering. We're doomed, Zorp. Doomed. Not yet, Inky. Listen, I have a plan. Zorp grabbed Inky's tentacle, pulling him upright. A crazy, probably suicidal plan, but a plan nonetheless. Suicidal? Perfect. Matches my current mood. Inky said, but let Zorp pull him along. The navigation bridge was a disaster zone. Alarms blared. A small fire crackled near a console displaying a garbled star chart. Captain Krill was wrestling with a Glagan officer over a deactivated stun baton, his face a mask of grizzled determination. Bunnies hopped merrily across the control panels, their soft paws triggering random functions. Zorp! What in the blazes? Krill roared, momentarily breaking free of the Glagan's grasp. Captain, I need to reroute the ship. Get us out of here. Zorp shouted over the din. Krill stared at him, bewildered. Reroute? Out of here? Are you mad? We're under Glagan escort. Escort? Captain, have you seen what's happening out there? That escort is currently being overrun by cuteness. Zorp gestured widely. Trust me, Captain. This escort is about to become a prison. Krill, despite his initial shock, seemed to register the truth in Zorp's words. He glanced at the chaos unfolding outside the bridge viewport. The Glagan cruiser was now listing precariously, smoke billowing from several compartments. All right, Scuzzbucket. You got 5 minutes. And if this ends with us drifting into a black hole, I'm haunting you for the rest of your miserable life. Zorp grinned, relief flooding him. Deal. He shoved his way towards the navigation console, ignoring the panicked cries of the Glagan soldiers still struggling with the bunny invasion. He knew the Rusty Bucket's navigation system like the back of his grimy hand, every shortcut, every override, every glitch. The Glagan interface, however, was another story. Alien glyphs swam before his eyes. He jabbed frantically at the controls, trying to decipher the commands. Inky, I need you. Can you translate any of this? Inky, still trembling, peered at the console. I recognize some of the symbols. Basic Glagan navigation protocols, maybe. Maybe isn't good enough. We need a hyperspace jump, and we need it now. Zorp barked, sweat beading on his forehead. Suddenly, a Glagan soldier, his uniform ripped and smeared with something sticky and pink, lunged at Zorp, brandishing a plasma pistol. Traitorous scum, he snarled. Before Zorp could react, Inky, in a surprising burst of courage, shot out a stream of ink, splattering the Glagan's visor. The soldier yelped, stumbling backward, momentarily blinded. Go, Zorp, go. I'll hold him off. Inky squeaked, frantically squirting ink at any Glagan who dared approach. Zorp, fueled by Inky's unexpected bravery, focused all his attention on the console. He bypassed security protocols, rerouted power conduits, and manually inputted a new hyperspace jump coordinate, a remote sector known for its unstable wormholes, but far, far away from the Glagan Empire. His fingers flew across the keyboard, inputting override codes he'd memorized during his many unauthorized excursions into the navigation bay. The console beeped, whirred, and then, finally, accepted the new course. Hyperspace jump initiated. Zorp yelled, just as 2 more Glagan soldiers burst onto the bridge, plasma rifles raised. Captain Krill, having finally subdued his opponent, tackled one of the soldiers. Inky, meanwhile, continued his valiant defense, creating a swirling cloud of ink that obscured the console and made aiming impossible. The Rusty Bucket shuddered violently. The lights flickered. A high-pitched whine filled the bridge. Brace yourselves! Krill bellowed. The viewport shimmered, then dissolved into a swirling vortex of colors. The stars stretched and blurred, transforming into streaks of light. The Rusty Bucket lurched forward, leaving the chaotic scene on the Glagan cruiser behind. They had jumped. Zorp slumped against the console, gasping for breath. Inky, covered in ink, collapsed beside him, tentacles trembling. Krill, bruised and battered but grinning, clapped Zorp on the shoulder. Well done, Scuzzbucket. You may have just saved our skins. He paused, his grin fading slightly. But we're not out of the woods yet. Where exactly did you send us? Zorp swallowed hard. To the Kessel Run. Without the proper modifications. Krill's eyes widened. The Kessel Run? Are you trying to kill us all now? Outside the viewport, the swirling chaos of hyperspace continued, a constant reminder of the unpredictable journey ahead. They had escaped the immediate threat, but a far greater danger loomed. And Zorp knew, with a sinking feeling, that this was only the beginning. The rabbit-induced chaos had merely opened the door to a whole new level of trouble, a level he was now, irrevocably, responsible for. But amidst the dread, a flicker of determination ignited within him. He would fix this. He had to. Neutral territory. The rusty bucket shuddered as it locked into docking bay Gamma 7 of the Neutral Zone space station, a sprawling, multi-tiered metropolis of commerce and questionable legality. Zorp, still buzzing with adrenaline from the hyperspace jump, peered out a porthole. The station was a kaleidoscope of mismatched modules, patched-together plating, and flashing neon signs advertising everything from genuine Glazen grubworms to hyperspace hairpieces. Neutral territory, Captain Krill grumbled, his voice crackling over the a wretched hive of scum and villainy. Just what we needed. He sounded less angry than weary. Scuzzbucket, Squibbles, report to the cargo hold. Bunny containment detail. And try not to let any escape this time. My patience is thinner than a Glazen credit. Zorp exchanged a nervous glance with Inky, who looked like he was about to faint. The Kessel Run had been rough, even by Kessel Run standards, and the remaining bunnies, while fewer in number, seemed determined to make up for their lost comrades with sheer, concentrated chaos. The cargo hold was a scene of fluffy pandemonium. Several crates had been chewed through, and the bunnies were now sporting bits of packing foam in their fur, giving them the appearance of miniature, deranged snowdrifts. They hopped, they multiplied though hopefully at a slower rate now, and they emitted a constant stream of high-pitched squeaks that grated on Zorp's nerves. Right, Zorp said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Squibbles, you take the left flank. I'll handle the right. Remember the netting. And for the love of the cosmos, don't make eye contact. I think they sense fear. Inky whimpered and brandished his net like a flimsy shield. The next hour was a blur of frantic chases, near misses, and the occasional bunny-induced nip. Zorp managed to snag a few, stuffing them unceremoniously into reinforced crates. Inky, however, was having less success. He tripped over a loose cable, sending a spray of space carrots flying, and the bunnies descended on him like a furry swarm. Help! Inky squeaked, disappearing beneath a mountain of fluff. Zorp plunged into the fray, scooping up bunnies left and right. He felt a strange surge of something. Not quite bravery, but perhaps a grudging respect for the sheer tenacity of these fluffy little agents of destruction. He even managed a smile as he wrestled a particularly stubborn bunny into a crate. Just as they were starting to gain control, the ship's comm crackled to life again. This time, it was Stella Stardust, her voice laced with amusement. Captain Krill to the bridge, please. And Scuzzbucket, Squibbles, you might want to hear this. They left the cargo hold, still a mess, but at least contained, and hurried to the bridge. Captain Krill was staring at the main view screen, his face a mask of disbelief. Stella was leaning back in her chair, a mischievous glint in her eyes. The screen showed a news report from the Galactic Broadcasting Corporation. The headline blared, Glazen fleet plagued by bunnies? The reporter, a sleek-haired Glazen with a perpetually disapproving expression, was struggling to maintain composure. Behind him, footage showed Glazen battleships being overrun by hordes of space bunnies. Glazen soldiers, usually so stoic and disciplined, were shown slipping on piles of space carrots, tripping over bunny-shaped landmines apparently a thing, and generally looking utterly bewildered. The situation remains chaotic, the reporter stammered, adjusting his collar. The bunnies, apparently originating from unknown sources, have infiltrated key systems, causing widespread malfunctions and a significant drop in Glazen battle readiness. The report cut to an interview with a Glazen admiral, who looked like he hadn't slept in days. He was trying to explain the situation with a straight face, but his voice kept cracking. We are taking all necessary measures to eradicate the bunny menace, he said, wiping a smudge of carrot juice from his uniform. We assure the galaxy that this unfortunate incident will not affect our ability to maintain order. The broadcast then showed snippets of the bunnies wreaking havoc, chewing through power cables, short-circuiting navigation systems, and generally turning the Glazen fleet into a fluffy, carrot-fueled disaster zone. Stella chuckled, shaking her head. Well, well, well. Looks like your little friends have become galactic celebrities, Zorp. Captain Krill remained silent for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then, a slow smile spread across his lips. By the nebulae, he muttered. Those blasted bunnies actually did it. They crippled the Glagan fleet. He let out a hearty laugh, the first Zorp had heard in a long time. Serves those tin-plated tyrants right. Always so obsessed with order and control. Seems like a little chaos was just what they needed. Zorp felt a surge of something. Pride? Relief? He wasn't sure. But he knew one thing, he had a very, very strange feeling about what was to come. The news report changed, showing images of space stations across the galaxy, filled with beings of all shapes and sizes, watching the Glagan's bunny-induced humiliation. Laughter echoed through the crowded cantinas and bustling marketplaces. Holoscreens flashed with bunny-themed memes and jokes. It seems the whole galaxy is laughing at the Glagans, Stella said, still grinning. And thanks to you, Zorp, they have a pretty good reason to be. But Zorp couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The Glagans wouldn't take this humiliation lying down. They would be back, and they would be angrier than ever. He looked at Inky, who was still trembling slightly, and then at Captain Krill, who was now humming a jaunty tune. Captain, Zorp said, his voice barely above a whisper. What about the bioweapon? What if the Glagan still managed to deploy it? The laughter on the bridge died down. Captain Krill's smile faded. Stella's eyes narrowed. The reality of the situation hung heavy in the air. The bunnies might have bought them some time, but the real threat was still out there, lurking in the shadows. And Zorp knew, with a chilling certainty, that he was the only one who could stop it. Zorp the hero. A cacophony of cheers erupted. Zorp, balancing precariously atop stacked biofuel containers, felt the plaudits wash over him like a warm tide, raising the fine hairs on his carapace. Dignitaries he'd only glimpsed in grainy broadcasts now jostled for position, offering surprisingly gentle pats despite their varied anatomies, and spilling effusive praise. A diminutive flumph, whose usual pronouncements on cosmic economics were steeped in pessimism, wobbled closer, a single, gleaming eye fixed on him. You rescued my cousin's freighter, young Scuzzbucket. She was transporting a shipment of hyperreactive giggle gas. Those Glagan cruisers were poised for a disastrous detonation. Zorp, tongue-tied, mumbled, I just wanted to liberate the Lagomorphs. A nearby Rigelian, magnificent in his ceremonial attire, resonated with a booming voice, but in doing so, you crippled the Glagan armada. Immeasurable lives were preserved. You, young one, are a savior. Stella Stardust, casually leaning against a stack of plasma conduits, winked at Zorp, a playful grin tugging at her lips. Don't let it swell your head, space urchin. But you certainly threw a wrench in the bad guy's plans. Always a plus. The acclaim continued, a surging wave of appreciation threatening to capsize Zorp's composure. He noticed Captain Krill standing at the periphery, his expression a study in austere pride. Krill summoned him with a twitch of his tentacle. Scuzzbucket, Krill rumbled, his voice a low growl against the celebratory din report. Zorp navigated the crowd, feeling like a mote of cosmic dust caught in a sunspot's flare. He stood before Krill, fidgeting with his delicate antennae. Krill cleared his throat, his chest swelling slightly. Zorp Scuzzbucket, given your unorthodox actions that resulted in a substantial disruption to the Glagan war machine, and after careful deliberation regarding your singular skill set, I am promoting you to the rank of junior navigator. Zorp's mandibles nearly detached. Junior? Navigator? But I'm a mere hull scrubber. We're a hull scrubber, Krill corrected. Now you're a junior navigator. Don't develop delusions of grandeur. You'll still swab decks when you're off duty. But now you'll chart courses too. And don't presume this absolves you of your sanitation duties. A pristine vessel is a contented vessel. And a contented vessel is less susceptible to space bunny infestations. He paused, a ghost of a smile gracing his features. Report to the navigation deck at 0600 hours sharp. Ensign Quirk will initiate you. And for the love of all that is holy, refrain from unleashing any further genetically modified lagomorphs on unsuspecting sectors. He clapped Zorp on the shoulder, a surprisingly forceful gesture. Dismissed. Zorp, still struggling to process the upgrade, managed a dazed, "Understood, Captain." As Zorp ambled away, Stella sidled up to Krill. "Quite the leap of faith, Captain. Think he's up to it?" Krill grunted, a sound like tectonic plates shifting. "He's got more audacity than acumen, that's certain. And sometimes, that's precisely what's required." Besides, he conceded, a hint of amusement flickering in his eyes, it should prove enlightening to observe what kind of bedlam he orchestrates with a navigation console at his disposal. Far across the galaxy, in the Glagan sector, pandemonium reigned. The once immaculate, geometrically perfect Glagan homeworlds were now infested with fluffy, rapidly reproducing space rabbits. The Glagan fleet, optimized for precise, synchronized assaults, was rendered impotent against the furry invasion. Urgent holographic reports flooded the Glagan command centers, displaying scenes of utter chaos. Glagan warriors, encased in their sleek, obsidian armor, were depicted fruitlessly swatting at bunnies with energy batons, only to be engulfed by sheer weight of numbers. Warships, their sophisticated armaments useless, drifted listlessly, their interiors overrun with hopping, nibbling creatures. One particularly mortifying report showed a Glagan admiral, his face twisted in fury, attempting to address his forces, only to have a bunny leap atop his head and begin chewing on his command antennae. The transmission abruptly ceased. The Glagan leadership, obsessed with order and control, was in complete disarray. Their inflexible hierarchies and meticulously crafted strategies were no match for the unpredictable, anarchic nature of the space bunnies. The very foundations of their society, built upon absolute obedience and unwavering discipline, were crumbling. Aboard the Stardust Drifter, Zorp stared at the navigation console, a bewildering constellation of blinking lights and arcane glyphs. Ensign Quirk, a high-strung, twitchy being with a comprehensive understanding of galactic cartography, was attempting to elucidate the intricacies of hyperspace jumps. "Now, you see here, Scuzzbucket," Quirk sputtered, gesturing to a complex equation dominating the screen. This is the Weinbaum-Tonowski equation, which calculates the ideal trajectory for navigating a class for gravitational anomaly. A miscalculation of even a microfraction can land you well, just about anywhere. Or nowhere at all. Zorp's focus blurred. He grasped hull scrubbing. He understood the fundamental mechanics of ventilation systems. He even understood, instinctively, the voracious appetite of space bunnies. But this was an entirely different order of complexity. He glanced out the viewport, meeting Stella's gaze. She offered a reassuring nod. He inhaled deeply, attempting to quell his galloping pulse. He was Zorp Scuzzbucket, junior navigator. He might not comprehend the Weinbaum-Tonowski equation, but he understood one fundamental truth: he had to thwart the Glagans. And somehow, he would. Even if it meant unleashing further waves of chaos upon the galaxy. Adventures ahead. The skeletal frame of Space Station Chimera vibrated with the mournful resonance of stressed metal. Rivets shrieked in protest as robotic arms, like arachnid automatons, scrabbled across the rusty bucket's battle-scarred plating. On the observation deck, Captain Krill, his face etched with the cartography of worry, nursed a steaming mug of nebula brew. Those cotton-tailed catastrophes had truly left their mark. "Reckon they'll patch up, Cap-N." Inky squibbles chirped nervously beside him, their tentacles fluttering with anxiety. Inky was a poor traveler even under ideal circumstances, and the recent lagomorph lunacy hadn't helped. Krill merely grunted, taking a slow draft. "They'd better. We're bleeding credits dry just sitting here." Besides, a glint of rare humor sparked in his eyes, "I'd hate to think Zorp would have to return to hull scouring." The lad possesses a certain aptitude. Below, on the bridge, Zorp stood transfixed before the expansive viewport, a panorama of swirling starlight. He was still reeling from his unexpected promotion, this view something he'd only witnessed through the grimy visors of maintenance drones. He felt transformed. It wasn't just the ill-fitting navigator's uniform, reeking faintly of mothballs and forgotten dreams, but a newfound sense of purpose. He was no longer just Zorp Scuzzbucket, the invisible space urchin lost in the galactic machinery. Now, he was Zorp Scuzzbucket, Junior Navigator, an improbable title, a potential game-changer, a bunnycharmer, something more. He closed his eyes, struggling to conjure the star charts he'd half-absorbed during his cursory and baffling training. Nebulas, constellations, hyperspace vectors, a jumbled mess of celestial jargon. He'd probably retained more information about the Glagan's preferred lubricant brand than anything actually pertinent. A gravelly voice broke his concentration. Taking in the sights, Scuzzbucket. Zorp startled, nearly toppling a pile of navigational logs, luckily composed only of dusty advertisements for asteroid mining. Captain Krill stood framed in the doorway, his expression enigmatic. "Ah, yes, sir. Just calibrating my spatial awareness," Zorp stammered, hoping his voice conveyed more conviction than he felt. Krill arched a skeptical brow. "Spatial awareness, is it? Well, try not to calibrate us into a singularity. We've had our quota of thrills." He tossed Zorp a well-worn datapad. "Revised flight plans. We're diverting to the Andromeda trade route. Intel suggests the Glagans are rerouting their supply lines after the recent unpleasantness. We need to intercept them, gauge their intentions." Zorp swallowed hard. Intercepting Glagan supply lines? That sounded considerably more perilous than scraping cosmic detritus. But he nodded, attempting a confident demeanor he certainly didn't feel. "Understood, Captain. I'll familiarize myself with the spatial coordinates." Krill chuckled, a deep rumble in his chest. "Just don't familiarize yourself with the ejection lever, Scuzzbucket. We need you on this one." He clapped Zorp on the shoulder, a surprisingly weighty gesture. "And try to avoid attracting any more genetically modified rabbits, understood?" With that, he turned, leaving Zorp alone with a datapad and a burgeoning premonition of doom. He stared at the flight plans, the complex diagrams and numerical strings swimming before his gaze. He was drowning in information. He was a hull scrubber, not a navigator. His job was scraping space barnacles, not calculating hyperspace jumps. But then he recalled the fear etched on Inky's face, the menacing silhouettes of Glagan cruisers looming over the rusty bucket, the potential for utter chaos the bunnies held. He imagined the Glagan planets overrun by waves of adorable, yet ruinous, lagomorphs. A faint hope kindled that his inadvertent actions might have averted catastrophe. He straightened his shoulders, resolution hardening his expression. Ignorance would not cripple him. He had a task now, a chance to matter. Even a space urchin could be a hero, he realized. He devoted the following hours to studying the datapad, deciphering the arcane language of space navigation. He bombarded Bolt, the ship's perpetually frazzled pilot, with a barrage of questions, each met with a weary sigh and a condescending explanation. He even consulted the ship's ancient and erratic AI, rewarded with cryptic pronouncements and existential koans. Finally, the robotic arms detached from the rusty bucket's hull. The station granted departure clearance, and the ship jolted to life. Bolt's voice crackled over the comms. "All right, Scuzzbucket, punch in the coordinates for the Andromeda trade route." "Chop chop. We're approaching an asteroid field, and I'd prefer not to add space rock slalom to my list of complaints." Zorp inhaled deeply, his fingers trembling as he entered the coordinates into the navigation console. He verified, re-verified, then verified again for good measure. "Coordinates locked, Bolt." "Ready when you are." Bolt grunted. "Here we go. Hold on tight, Scuzzbucket. It's gonna be a wild ride." With a lurch, the rusty bucket disengaged from the station and plunged into the star-strewn abyss. Zorp gripped the chair arms, his heart hammering. Outside the viewport, the asteroid field materialized, a chaotic ballet of cosmic debris hurtling through the void. Bolt expertly piloted the ship through the treacherous gauntlet, evading asteroids the size of small moons with practiced skill. Zorp watched in breathless awe, initial terror yielding to a surge of exhilaration. The rusty bucket was flying, streaking through the cosmos, embarking on a new odyssey. As they cleared the asteroid field and engaged the hyperdrive, Zorp gazed at the swirling kaleidoscope of light and color. He was a universe away from the grimy hulls of his past, a galaxy removed from his former anonymity. He couldn't predict the trials ahead, the dangers they would face, the barriers they would break. But he knew one thing: he was ready. He was Zorp Scuzzbucket, junior navigator sort of, and he was going to save the galaxy, one chaotic, bunny-induced predicament at a time. Or at least, he'd give it his best shot. That had to count for something, right? The rusty bucket accelerated into the hyperspace lane, leaving the lagomorph-infested Glagan sector in its wake, hurtling toward the great unknown, toward adventure, toward a destiny beyond his wildest fantasies. He envisioned the Glagans, currently grappling with an overpopulation of rabbits, and allowed himself a small, impish smile.